And we can go into some of the books that were removed from what we know as the modern day Bible. You know, when you have certain books that are removed because they don't think that people should have access to this information or know it, you know, why remove a book from a Bible, right? You have the Ethiopian Orthodox text, which has, I think, 88 books of the Bible in total. But in the Ethiopian Orthodox text, it's basically kind of like a mainline OG version of the Bible. And then sometime in the 4th century, there was actually a group that came together and they removed certain books. And well, why would they remove this information? If it's truly, you know, written in part of the oldest Bible in the world, why would they then take it out? The Catholic Bible as well, that also has, they call them Apocrypha texts because the King James Bible doesn't acknowledge them, but there are also other books that are not considered, you know, approved by the King James. So
if you go back to the oldest works of the Bible, weren't most of those stories handed down generation after generation and then eventually written down?
Written into text. Well, some of them were written by prophets and then, but I mean, Enoch is apparently supposed to predate even the time of Genesis. But you have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that actually, there's Ethiopian Jews. And that's considered the most pure form of the Bible.
Was the Book of Enoch removed from the Bible? Were there books that we said, hey, we don't like that book. We don't like what it teaches. We decided that we're going to take it out. And we, you know, humans decided to remove a text from the Bible. Is that what happened? Because that's what Paulina Luna seems to think. And she was on Joe Rogan talking about it, explaining to Joe Rogan how books had been removed from the Bible. This was just about a month or two ago. And I thought I'd come on and share it with you today, what she said and what is true about the Bible. I'm Pastor Josh Barnes. Keep calm. I'm a professional theologian, and I'm here to help. This is POV Scriptura, where we take issues like this that are in the news, that are popular, whatever, people are talking about them. We slow down and we take time to think about them. This is why we are not the breaking news source. You can get breaking news from anywhere. You can go find it somewhere else. That's great. We're here to say, what about that breaking news that was like a week ago? Let's think about this. And as Christians, let's consider what's true about this. And make a good decision there. Okay, so with all that being said, we're going to dive into the weeds here. This is the claim that Paulina Luna decided to bring up most commonly throughout the interview with Joe Rogan. It was like the main thing she wanted to get to, and it was that books have been removed from the Bible. Let me play you a sort of a. If you watch the opening scene, you saw this already, but let me just play you sort of a montage of her saying books have been removed from the Bible from throughout the interview.
And we can go into some of the books that were removed from what we know as the modern day Bible. You know, when you have certain books that are removed because they don't think that people should have access to this information or know it, you know, why remove a book from a Bible, right? You have the Ethiopian Orthodox text, which has, I think, 88 books of the Bible in total. But in the Ethiopian Orthodox text, it's basically kind of like a mainline OG version of the Bible. And then sometime in the 4th century, there was actually a group that came together and they removed certain books. And well, why would they remove this information?
Okay, I gotta stop. All right, we're gonna talk about the truth about all this stuff. You got, if you really are a glutton for punishment. Actually, it's quite an interesting interview. Go look up the Joe Rogan show, YouTube, wherever you watch Joe Rogan or listen to him. Obviously, I can't recommend that you listen to it around children. Joe Rogan, it doesn't speak in a way that is very pure. He uses some language I wouldn't recommend using around children. But otherwise, it's really quite a fascinating episode. And Joe Rogan does a great job with these kinds of things. But I have to tell you that listening to Paulina Luna is difficult because you want to think that somebody who's in the House of Representatives, an elected official from Florida, is a really super intelligent, smart person who's really careful. I know that doesn't happen. I know that's like wishful thinking. But it is hard to just hear her talk about things if you know the truth, and then to hear her talk about it, and it's like, wait, what you're saying, you don't know what you're talking about. For instance, you just heard her say that the Ethiopian Orthodox canon had the Book of Enoch, and then sometime in the 4th century, people decided to get together and remove the Book of Enoch from the canon. There are canon lists before the 4th century, and none of them have the Book of Enoch in them. There are several canon lists from before the 4th century, and none of them have the Book of Enoch. The Ethiopian Orthodox canon didn't show up until the 4th century. It was the 4th century when the Ethiopian Orthodox canon added the Book of Enoch. Okay, this is difficult for me. You can see this, but there's a lot to say here. We're going to break down the arguments. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the Book of Enoch. I have the Book of Enoch. I actually have this lovely 100-book Apocrypha Ultimate Collection that my wife bought me for Christmas last year, and includes the Book of Enoch. I have read the Book of Enoch. I have read many of these books that are called Apocrypha. The word Apocrypha means they're rejected or not inspired scripture. That's what Apocrypha means. So some of the books that are in what we would call Apocrypha, the Catholic Church would not call Apocrypha. They would call them Deuterocanon. And we'll talk about that probably between... this will probably be a 2-parter, by the way. I'm just recording it now, so who knows? Maybe I get all my thoughts in 30 minutes. But more than likely, this will be this episode and next episode we'll be talking about this. So I'm sorry. I'll have to make you wait another week to hear the whole thing. But that's all right. It makes you come back. Makes you, leave you on the edge of your seat. Okay, there's a lot to talk about. So so the claim of Paulina Luna is clear. She's said this over and over and over, that the Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible. It should have been removed from the Bible because it explains demons. Okay, the Book of Enoch... okay, the Book of Enoch does explain demons, but that doesn't mean that it should be in the Bible, okay? When you're coming across something in the Bible that seems mysterious and unclear, it is normal for people to want to write an explanation for that, to come up with, as it were, fan fiction to fill in the gap. Well, what's going on here? Well, it must be, that where did demons come from? Well, it must be that the demons saw men. In Genesis 6, it says, sons of God saw the daughters of men and they procreated with them. It must be that demons came and wanted to have children with women. And therefore, the Book of Enoch concocts this whole several angels who fell and procreated with women, and their children... God destroyed, locked them in chains, destroyed their children, who were the Nephilim. I don't know what their children did wrong. They were called the fallen. The Nephilim is the fallen. You'd think that name would be on the angels, not the children. But the children are called Nephilim, the fallen. That's what the word means. And that's the word that's translated giant in Genesis chapter 6. And, so the Book of Enoch goes on and creates this whole fill-in-the-gap fan theory, essentially, about what happened in Genesis 6. With very little evidence for it. As a matter of fact, the best evidence we have for the story of the Book of Enoch being potentially true, where there could be demons involved at all in Genesis 6, is in the New Testament by the New Testament writers who seem to confirm that somewhere in Genesis 6 demons were active. Maybe. There's some interpretations of some of the things that they said. So it's definitely not clear. But at any rate, that's the story of the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch tries to explain what happened in the Genesis 6 time before the flood of Noah's time, and where these beings called the Nephilim came from. He says that the sons of God refers to angels that fell and procreated with women. There's a lot of problems with that story. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the question that we need to start with is, was the book of Enoch removed from the Bible, or was it original? For that, I will bring you to another video that asks that question.
If you go back to the oldest works of the Bible, weren't most of those stories handed down generation after generation and then eventually written down?
Written into text. Well, some of them are written by prophets, but I
Right.
mean, Enoch is apparently supposed to predate even the time of Genesis and talk.
The nuttiest one is
Okay, so here Joe Rogan is asking, well, weren't these things all just sort of orally passed on and then written down later? No, not for the books of the Bible. The books of the Bible were all written by the authors. The only really debated one about whether it was written by the person, by the people, by the eyewitnesses, would be the book of Job. You might say that the book of First and Second Chronicles was sort of backwards looking, but it was compiling all the written documents and everything from earlier, and we can compare it to First and Second Kings and see that it's actually compiling a lot of the same information. So First and Second Chronicles, you might say that, but really you're just compiling stuff that's already written down. Really, the book of Job is the only one that we think maybe that wasn't actually written by someone who was there. Maybe that was passed on orally and God sort of preserved it and maybe Moses wrote it down, right? Other than Job, all the books of the Bible are written by eyewitnesses to the events they're describing. Ezekiel wrote Ezekiel. Moses wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, granted, Moses in Genesis was writing things that he did not see in Genesis, because Genesis goes all the way back to the creation. But Moses is on the top of a mountain, and he's doing miracles while he's writing these things down. God is demonstrating with power and might and inexplainable miracles that Moses is writing, in fact, what God is giving him. So then Moses gets a little bit of a pass where he can say, look, I'm not just writing eyewitness testimony. I'm writing what God gave me, and I can prove that God gave it to me because I'm writing in front of the eyewitnesses of people who saw me do all these miracles, claiming to them in my writings that I'm doing miracles. Okay, so you have somebody. Imagine you didn't do any miracles, and then you go to a person and say, "Hey, look at this book I wrote for you. It talks about how I did all these miracles in front of you and why you should listen to me." And they're like, "No, you didn't do any miracles in front of me." That's what would have happened if Moses came back with that from Mount Sinai and he hadn't done any miracles after writing about how he did all these miracles. So Moses did write Genesis, which is not something he was an eyewitness of. There would be an exception. But he's writing it as he's in a mountain, surrounded by smoke and audible talking from God and and trumpet, inexplainable trumpet sounds, water coming from rocks and manna from on the ground, and just all kinds of miraculous things going on that prove that Moses was actually getting this information directly from God. So you have Genesis that could be up for debate. And that's why that's why Job could also be sort of like an add-on to Genesis, right? The book of Job could have been written by Moses in the mountain because it's proven by all the miracles. But no, the rest of the books of the Bible, these are written by eyewitnesses, right? David wrote many of the Psalms. Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. These are people who wrote in their time about things that were happening then, right? So they're not things that are like, oh, this oral tradition, people write it down later. Except for the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch is definitely oral tradition that was written down later. This is one of the key reasons why we know that the book of Enoch does not belong in the Bible. One of the key reasons why it was rejected. We'll talk about in a minute. They're going to ask why it was rejected in one of the clips I have for you today. Or next week. We'll see. We'll see when we get there. But we'll talk in a little bit about why one of them, why it was rejected and all the reasons. But one of the reasons is because it definitely wasn't written by Enoch. It definitely wasn't. We'll talk about why, how we know that. But for one thing, you have to remember that Moses is writing like what 12 or 1400 years BC, right? So that's really early. Moses is writing near the beginning of the Hebrew language, Hebrew alphabet, the written Hebrew language. Now, some people say it actually goes quite a bit before Moses. Some people say it didn't even exist at the time of Moses. It wasn't until later. But we're not going that far back before Moses when the Hebrew alphabet language was actually invented. So the book of Enoch is Hebrew. It certainly could not have come from Enoch, who lived like 1,000 years before Moses. I mean, I'm probably overestimating the number of years. We're talking, oh yeah, you're in the neighborhood of like 600-700 years. I haven't done all the math, but yeah. So definitely the book of Enoch was written in Hebrew before Hebrew was invented. So Enoch did not write the book of Enoch. The best case scenario for the book of Enoch is that it accurately preserves things that Enoch said that were passed down orally. So when Joe Rogan says, weren't these things passed down orally? He's saying all of the books of the Bible. The answer is no. All of the books of the Bible weren't passed down orally. The ones that were given supernaturally from God, God gave along with miracles to prove that they were true. But they weren't just passed on orally and then recorded. That's not that wouldn't, we'd have no confidence in what it actually says. So or what it originally said, because somebody could have forgot something, and depending on how many years they could have added something, you never know. So no, that's not how the biblical books came to us. That is how the book of Enoch came to us. It's one of the reasons why we reject it as scripture, because scripture needs to be provable scripture, not something that was passed down orally for all these years. And I'll show you why we know that it wasn't written until 2,000 years or more after Enoch lived. So we have long, thousands and thousands of years of oral history. And then you have the book of Enoch, which means how much of it is true, we really don't know. We don't know. Does any of it come from Enoch? We'll talk about that. I think a little bit of it probably does, but we really don't know. Anyway, that's a quick explanation to Joe Rogan's question. He says, didn't these things come from oral tradition? No, not the biblical books. But yes, the book of Enoch did come from just passed down orally from memory until finally it was written down. And that's the best case scenario for the book of Enoch. The worst case is people just made it up. They just made it up. It was false.
Ezekiel.
I'm telling you, Enoch is even crazier than Ezekiel.
Oh, I've read it. I just don't. Did you find?
Okay, so he says that what's really crazy is the book of Ezekiel. That's true. That's a very crazy book. That's a very interesting book, especially the first chapter. Yeah, the book of Ezekiel's it's a trip. But I think having studied it quite a bit, I think that it's actually fairly reasonable. But you've got to understand apocalyptic scripture and how the genre of apocalyptic scripture works. So there's that. Going on. Now he's going to ask about why it wasn't included. His assistant, I don't know who's the assistant to Joe Rogan's assistant guy there, but here we go.
Find anything about whether or not Enoch is controversial?
You can look up the 4th century.
It was discluded as, I guess, since the 5th century. It wasn't in canon.
5th century.
And why did it get discluded?
It says the Jewish scribes or the priests didn't believe, the rabbis didn't believe it was canon.
Huh.
So it's regarded as scripture.
But what's interesting is,
so Jewish scribes and rabbis didn't consider it to be canon. So then it's not canon. And that sounds wrong, right? Like, oh my goodness, they decided to exclude it. Why should we trust them? Why should we trust them? There's actually the idea that they're going to reject this is actually quite laughable. Well, let them go ahead and reject it, and then I'll respond to it.
Is it, even if that's the case, though, you have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that actually there's Ethiopian Jews.
Okay. Anna Paulina Luna, Representative Anna Paulina Luna. This is awful. The Jews rejected it and never accepted it as scripture. So she says, yeah, but that doesn't work because there's Ethiopian Orthodox. She means Ethiopian Orthodox church who had it, and there's Ethiopian Jews. How are you making this jump? Okay, guys, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is something that you see in the 4th century A.D. Okay, the Jews and their scriptures were compiled and recognized in like 200, 300 BC. In the 2nd century BC. We are talking about a jump of 600 years here, nearly. And so 600 years. And she's saying, yeah, but there's Jews in Ethiopia and there's a church in Ethiopia. Yeah, but remember, the Ethiopians who became Christians aren't part of the Jews we're talking about here. Those would be the Christians, right? Now, sure, there's Jews who become Christians and all that kind of stuff. But this is, they aren't the Jewish rabbis who are leading Judaism. This doesn't make any sense. It's all just all jumbled around. It makes no sense. But, the Jews rejected it, but they didn't reject it because, see, there were Jews in Ethiopia. Yeah, but that was 600 years later, okay? We're talking about why it was rejected originally. You're saying it was accepted by the Ethiopians 600 years after it was rejected by the Jews. So was it taken out by the Jews when the first time we find it in is 600 years later? Or maybe it was added in by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And that is certainly the case. If it was taken out, quote unquote, taken out before it was ever put in, then maybe it wasn't taken out. Maybe it was added 600 years later, not taken out. So, see, if she knew anything about the dating of the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, then this would be such a big deal. But yeah, so this makes her look pretty bad.
And that's considered the most pure form of the Bible. So
that's considered the most pure form of the Bible. By who? The Ethiopian Orthodox canon is the most pure form of the Bible? By who? Who considers the Ethiopian Orthodox canon to be the most pure form of the Bible? The Ethiopian Orthodox. They're the only ones who believe that. No one else thinks that. This is silly. So what she's saying is, since the Ethiopian Orthodox Church believes this to be the most pure form of the Bible, it must be. But I believe it to not be the most pure form of the Bible, so it must not be. Is it just whoever believes it, that's what it becomes? No, it's not considered the most pure form of the Bible. It wasn't even the first canon list that came out. There were many other canon lists before the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and the Ethiopian Orthodox added books that were not recognized ever by the Jews or by the church as canon. There is no canon list before the 4th century. None. No list of books that the Christians believe to be inspired that includes the Book of Enoch. None of them. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. All right, let's keep going. I'm getting a little bit rambunctious here.
Like, you actually have a division of like the Ethiopian Jewish class that actually recognized Enoch.
How weird is it that some rabbis 500 years ago made a call?
Okay, some rabbis 500 years ago made a call and removed the Book of Enoch. All right, now Joe Rogan he's making a joke, and it's fine. I'm not trying to pick on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan seems to be pretty level-headed and reasonable in this interview, by the way. I'm not trying to pick on him. But the Jews never, ever, ever, never, not in anywhere ever, did they ever accept the Book of Enoch as their canon. And we know this because they actually set aside the books they believed to be inspired and set them up in the temple. And so you can look at the books that were included and set up in the temple, and never was the Book of Enoch included. Never, ever, 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 no, and ever. So even if the Book of Enoch was from the time of Enoch, it was never considered scripture by the Jews. Now that's an important thing, because in the book of Romans, we're told that To the Jews were committed the oracles of God. Let me see if I can find that for you very quickly. I actually had forgotten to plan to do this. Is my planning, But here's what it is. Romans 3. I was right. I got it right. What advantage then hath the Jew, Paul writes, or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God. By the way, that statement is in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon. So if to the Jews was committed the oracles of God, meaning the Old Testament was committed to them, you'd think that somewhere in the New Testament they would be condemned for excluding one of the books of the Old Testament, one of the oracles of God. But never in the New Testament is like, listen, the Jews are wrong because they missed a book. It never says that. But yet to them was committed the oracles of God. And Jesus condemned them for a lot of things they were doing wrong, but never for getting the wrong books of the Bible. In fact, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount confirmed that they had the right books of the Bible. In Matthew chapter 5, he says this, think not that I am come to destroy or break apart. That's what the word destroy there means. I come not to destroy the law or the prophets. The law or the prophets, that would be a phrase that Jewish people would use to refer to the Old Testament, their scriptures, everything that's laid up in the temple, all the inspired books. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am come not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. He doesn't say, you guys got it wrong. He says, I'm not come to break this apart. I'm here to fulfill it. I'm not telling you. He had a great opportunity to tell them they got the wrong books and they forgot one book, but he doesn't. Why? Why doesn't he do that? When to them we're committed the oracles of God and they forgot a book? Well, maybe because they got it right. And maybe the book of Enoch is not inspired scripture. That's why it's a powerful argument to say that we reject it because the Jews rejected it, because it would be part of the Old Testament canon, and the Old Testament scriptures were committed to the Jews, according to Romans chapter 3. And since the Jews never recognized this as scripture, and Jesus never told the Jews they got it wrong, it just sort of follows for Christians to say that what the Jews had for scripture was correct. In the first century when Jesus was there and could have told them you got it wrong. And the apostles never corrected, and Jesus never corrected the Jews, saying they missed a book. So then it's a really good argument that the book of Enoch doesn't belong in the Bible, since the Jewish people never recognized it as scripture. That's what's being argued here when Joe Rogan says, well, isn't it crazy that the Jews just get to decide that this doesn't belong? No, it makes sense as long as the Jews before the time of Christ, because then Christ could reprimand them and tell them they got it wrong, or one of the apostles could say it. But never is that ever mentioned. In fact, they're complimented. I'm not come to destroy the law. So they're complimented about this. It doesn't seem like this is something that is a bad thing. They've done a good job with it. To them were committed the oracles of God, and that's a blessing that you got to be part of keeping the scriptures for everyone. Paul says in Romans chapter 3. So, yeah, the Christian position on the Old Testament is, well, if the Jews got it right, then we'll just take what the Jews got, and we'll debate what goes in the New Testament, in the writings of the apostles. But we don't debate the Old Testament. Essentially, we'll talk about in our next episode about the Catholic Church and everything. But at any rate, let's let Joe finish this clip here. Go ahead, Joe.
But that's what I'm saying is like you can't though discredit it because
that's kind of weird.
But you can't discredit it because, again, like when you have people removing books, I think, look, and I'm not telling people what to believe. I'm just saying you should take a look at it.
You can't discredit it because, you can't discredit it, because you can't, because we have people removing books, or we have people adding books. If the earliest lists don't have the book, and then later we have the book, then we don't have people removing a book. We have people adding a book. Now, in our next episode, part 2, we're going to talk about the King James Version. Did the King James Version rewrite the Bible, take out books that the Catholic Church had? Oh, this is going to be fun. We're not done yet. Don't go anywhere. Well, go somewhere because it'll be a week. But next week, join us for our next episode here on POV Scriptura. We'll see you then.